So let's pick up where we left off on our discussion about the urinary bladder, and we will talk about the capacity first. Um, the bladder actually can hold almost a liter, but it's going to signal that we need to urinate at about 350 milliliters. Now, 350 milliliters, that's about the amount of fluid that's in a 12-ounce Coke can, to give you just an idea. A moderately full bladder, one where you're definitely going to feel that you need to go to the restroom, is going to have about 500 milliliters, but again, it can hold almost twice that. This gives you a graphic to show you the position of the bladder, and you can see that when it is relatively close to empty, it is tucked behind the pubic symphysis. But as it gets filled with urine, it can extend up into the abdominopelvic cavity. Now, leading from the bladder to the external surface is the urethra, which is a narrow tube that runs to the exterior. It is different in men than it is in women, but it is lined with mucous membrane. Remember, everything that is has an opening to the outside has mucous membranes, and the opening of the urethra to the exterior is called the urinary meatus. Now, the urethra structure, it is a thin-walled tube that carries urine from the bladder to the outside of the body, and it uses peristalsis to do this. So basically, even hanging upside down, you would be able to pee. The release of urine is controlled by two sphincters. Those are muscles that clench like purse strings, and we have an internal urethral sphincter, which is involuntary and made of smooth muscle. Basically, when the bladder gets full, this muscle opens up. The external urethral sphincter is the one that we have voluntary control over. So basically, the internal sphincter opens up, signals to us that we need to go to urinate, and then we can go and voluntarily release the external sphincter. Now, there is a difference in the genders between men and women. The female urethra is actually only about an inch long, because it has a very short distance to go from the bladder to the outside. The male urethra actually passes around the pubic bone, goes through the prostate gland, and has to go through the penis. So overall, it's about 8 inches long. Location, females, it is along the wall of the vagina. Males, through the prostate and through the penis. Now, the function in females is that it carries urine, and that's all it does. In the male, it's actually part of the reproductive system as well, so it carries urine and is a passageway for sperm cells. So this is a view of the female urinary bladder, and again, we've got an internal sphincter, and then we've got an external sphincter, which we have control over, and then the urethra. Now, another term for urination is micturition, which is the passage of urine from the body. It's also called urinating or voiding, or any of a number of other terms that you may choose to use to describe what is going on. Internal sphincters, of course, I've already mentioned the internal sphincter, which is involuntary, and the external sphincter, which is voluntary. Once you open both of those sphincters, the detrusor muscle begins to contract on the bladder, causing it to force the urine out. The bladder permits storage of urine with little increase in pressure overall. The emptying reflex is initiated by a stretch reflex in the bladder, again, around 350 milliliters. So once the bladder has stretched to a certain point, it sends a signal that starts this urination reflex. And the first part of that is that the bladder will contract, and then you will have the internal urethral sphincter relax, You will get the sensation that you need to go to the restroom, and then the external sphincter will relax and urination can occur. Both sphincters must open to allow voiding. So even though you may feel a need to go, you can hold it for a little bit. The internal urethral sphincter is relaxed after stretching of the bladder. There is a nerve, the pelvic splanchnic nerve, which initiates the bladder to go into its reflex contractions. Urine is forced past the internal urethral sphincter and the person feels the urge to void. The external sphincter is voluntarily relaxed. I think we've covered that pretty well. There are a few things that can come into play, conditions that can arise that can either prevent you from making urine or can prevent you from voiding urine. So urinary retention, where the urine is produced but not voided. And one situation that comes into play with that, you could have cystitis that could cause that. It can also be a product of the prostate gland actually pinching the urethra. There is urinary suppression, where you're not making any urine, but the bladder is normal. This could be a product of dehydration, for instance. And then incontinence, where urine is voided involuntarily. You may lose control of the external urethral sphincter with a spinal injury or a stroke, loss of muscular control. You can also develop stress incontinence in women after childbirth. In that situation, you can have a woman who pees just a little bit if she sneezes or laughs or coughs as a product of having a child. Now, cystitis, bladder infection. You can have an overactive bladder as a result of that, so you need to urinate quite often, but you may have a small amount that you end up voiding, and it's called interstitial cystitis. You get extreme urgency and pain in urinating. Now, one of the common treatments for this, actually it works quite well, is to eat a yogurt with a live active culture, which takes care, it repopulates the vagina with the microorganisms necessary to block out the organisms that are causing the cystitis. Control of urine volume is mainly by the posterior pituitary hormones, antidiuretic hormone, which decreases production of urine, aldosterone, which is secreted by the adrenal cortex, and this is released when your blood pressure is a little high. So, your blood pressure is a little low, or potassium levels are high, and it increases the reabsorption of sodium. And remember again that sodium will follow water, or water will follow sodium. So if we are retaining sodium, we are retaining water. Now, those hormones help us retain urine. The atrial natriuretic peptide, or ANH, increases antinatriuretic hormone, also known, increases urine output in response to excess stretching of the heart. In this case, we build up a sufficient amount of blood volume from the fluids that we've drunk that now we've got lots and lots of plasma, and that amount of blood or blood volume results in the heart having to work harder, and as the heart has to work harder, it stretches, and that sends out or releases a hormone which makes us generate more urine. Now, characteristics of urine in general: in 24 hours we produce about 1 to 1.8 liters of urine. Urine and filtrate are different. Filtrate is everything in plasma except the proteins. Urine has been modified, so filtrate contains everything. Urine is what remains after the filtrate has lost most of its water, its nutrients, necessary ions, and has added into it substances that we want to get rid of. Urine contains nitrogenous wastes and substances that are not needed. So out of 180 liters of filtrate that are used, only about 1 to 2% of that filtrate ever becomes urine. Typical output of urine is 1 to 2 liters per day. Now, if you put out a lot of urine, that's polyuria. We see this in people who have a type 2 diabetes. Oliguria is a decreased output, and anuria is no output. Now, typical pH of urine is 4.68 to 8. So, mostly urine is acidic with an average of about 6.0. If someone were to be a vegetarian or a vegan and eat strictly plant life, then you can produce a basic urine, but it is not likely that you will see that. Urine is mostly water, but it does have nitrogenous wastes, which include urea and uric acid and other substances that the body doesn't need. Now, in terms of characteristics, it's yellow and clear. If it's cloudy, then we've got something going on. Color is due to pigment urochrome from the destruction of hemoglobin and various solutes. Again, urea, uric acid. It is sterile. This is one of the reasons why people say you can drink your pee. When it comes out, it is sterile. Now, if it sits for a period of time, it will develop a bacterial population. But it is sterile. It is slightly aromatic. That is, it smells just a little bit. It has a specific gravity of 1.001 to 1.035. That is how heavy it is, how heavy a milliliter of that is compared to a milliliter of water. 0 or 1 would be the density of water. Solutes normally found in urine include sodium and potassium ions, urea and uric acid from metabolism of proteins, and creatinine from muscle activity. Ammonia is in urine, and there are some breakdown products that occur after you urinate, so it can become, you can have ammonia develop in urine after you've urinated it. Bicarbonate ions, and we'll talk acid acid-base balance in a couple of minutes, and then hydrogen ions. Functionally, the kidneys develop by about the 3rd month in the newborn. In fact, the amniotic fluid is urine that the baby's bladder has produced, and if there is insufficient urine or insufficient amniotic fluid, they're going to be concerned that there's a problem with the child's kidneys. Bladder is small in the newborn. Urine cannot be concentrated for the first couple of months, so the kids void constantly. They say 5 to 40 times, but the average adult urinates 7 times a day, so I'm going to push that toward the 40 times a day limit. This is a good place to stop. There really is not much left on this, but just time-wise, we only have about 15 minutes for presentation. So I will pick up the last 3 or 4 slides in just a moment.